There are just hours remaining in the latest extension of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire. Already today, a hostage release has taken place. The IDF says 2 Israeli hostages have been turned over to the Red Cross in Gaza. More are expected to follow throughout the day. Both sides came to terms on a single-day extension last night. But there is also some new violence inside Israel. Police say 2 Palestinian men opened fire at a crowded bus stop in Jerusalem. The attack killed 3 people. The gunmen were fatally shot at the scene, and Hamas has claimed responsibility for that attack. Separately, the IDF says 2 soldiers were injured during a ramming attack in the West Bank. Israeli troops shot that driver. Our Lilia Luciano joins us now from Tel Aviv. Lilia, the 7th day of the hostage swaps are already underway. What more do we know now?
Well, Lana, it all changes constantly. All we know is, as you mentioned, there are 2 Israeli hostages who have already been released today. One is Mia Shem. She's 21 years old. The other one is Amit Susanna. She's 41 years old. This, I'll tell you, is the first time that we see hostages who are within the group of the Israeli hostages to be released, who are basically within the exchange, within the terms of the deal, to be released earlier in the day. We've seen that with some foreign nationals over the last several days. So why they were released earlier, we don't know, but we still expect a total of 10 Israeli hostages. Along with that, we always do expect a certain number of foreign nationals or dual citizens, and of course in exchange for generally 30 Palestinian prisoners. Generally, it's been women and children. But at this point, there are still minors and there are still women who have not been released. That means that there are still people who can be turned over, released by Hamas to Israel within the same terms of the deal. Yesterday, last night, and into the early hours of the morning, we didn't know whether this ceasefire was going to stop or not. And certainly the ceasefire continued, so there hasn't been fighting during the day today. And we're in the same position for tomorrow. This could be a just slow trickle day after day. We could hear of a different deal taking place. If hostages are expecting to see men, soldiers being released, there might need to be a different kind of deal because that wasn't part of this first phase. But I'll tell you this, the U.S. and U.S. diplomats, including first and foremost Secretary of State Antony Blinken, has been hard at work. He's here in Tel Aviv. He's met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, with President Herzog. He met with the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. He has been in meetings and communicating both the importance of releasing all of the hostages, the U.S. commitment for that, as well as the importance in stressing this to Israel of holding extreme settlers accountable. As you mentioned earlier, or just a few minutes ago, there were attacks, terrorist attacks earlier today that Hamas has taken responsibility for, and that follows the killing of an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, which the Palestinian Authority says came in the hands of the IDF. We saw the videos, extremely just gruesome, horrible to see videos of an 8-year-old being shot, being dragged by other children. And that, according to the Palestinian Authority, was done by IDF soldiers. And so the fighting within the West Bank has continued.
Our Lilia Luciano, thank you. CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. Nancy, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is there in Israel. He met with several Israeli and Palestinian officials. We heard from Lilia about those negotiations and how they're taking place. What message is he trying to portray to both sides?
Well, objective number one, Lana, is to try to get this humanitarian pause extended and for more than just one day at a time, both to allow the consistent handover of Israelis who are being held hostage in Gaza to continue, but also to give the U.S. more time to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. Just yesterday, the president said that for the first time, because of this pause, the U.S. had actually been able to get aid not just into Gaza from Egypt, but all the way up to northern Gaza, which is really difficult. And there are more U.S. planes coming in with humanitarian aid, bringing them to Egypt. So that is one goal. But there are others. And based on what we're hearing from Blinken's aides, the message that he has been giving to all of the Israeli officials that he met with today is that if and when this conflict does resume, that Israel needs to be much more careful, much more strategic about the way that it goes about its military operations, particularly because the expectation is that Israel is going to be much more focused in the future on southern Gaza. That's where a lot of Hamas leaders are now dug in. That's also where most of the population is. And so there is a very big concern about the ways that civilians could be affected once that bombing campaign resumes.
Well, and Nancy, with these latest attacks, how does all of that complicate Secretary Blinken's efforts to try and bring these two warring sides to any sort of agreement?
Well, you know, the pause is so fragile as it is. It takes an incredible amount of diplomacy just to get the pause extended by a day or two. And so anything can derail it. And any indication, for example, that Hamas was directing or encouraging these kinds of attacks would obviously have a major impact on the ability to extend the pause. Now, there's no indication at this point that that is what happened. It's quite possible that these individuals were acting on their own. And yet there were several Israelis who were killed, and that's of great concern to Israeli leaders. And so that just makes the very delicate diplomacy that is going on here involving the Secretary of State and the CIA director and lots of Israeli officials as well, just makes it all that much more difficult.
Yeah, and the U.S. is not a fully disinterested party. There are Americans that are being held hostage by Hamas. There are Americans that may still be in Gaza, American citizens. We did see an American released yesterday. How is the White House trying to secure more releases?
Well, they're pushing for the release not just of women and children because we are coming to the end of that phase, but they know it's going to be more difficult to get men, and particularly members of the military, out of Gaza. And most of the remaining, all but one of the remaining U.S. hostages, American hostages, do fall into that category. They are men, and that is much more difficult. And so that's part of the reason that they are pushing the Israelis to continue negotiating, not to resume their bombing campaign yet, but to see what they can do, even if it means releasing an even larger proportion of Palestinian prisoners, if that's what it takes to get the rest of these hostages home.
Right. Nancy Cordes, thank you.
You're welcome.
More than 200 Palestinian prisoners have been released in exchange for Israeli hostages held by Hamas. And these swaps have highlighted the cases of Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Israeli prisons are currently housing at least 7,000 Palestinians, according to a Palestinian prisoner rights group, Adamir. More than 2,000 of those detainees are being held under a policy called administrative detention. Now, that allows Israeli authorities to incarcerate Palestinians without charge and without a trial. These holds can be renewed indefinitely. Some individuals have been held for years without being charged, though most of the people being released were in prison for a shorter amount of time while awaiting trial or in administrative detention. Now, Palestinians under the age of 18 are not exempt, and the list of prisoners slated for possible release includes at least 124 teens. Annually, an average of 500 to 700 minors are held in military detention. Israel is one of only a few countries that prosecutes minors in military court. According to Save the Children, the most common charge for Palestinians under 18 is stone throwing, which could carry up to a 20-year prison sentence. Stone throwing is also one of the most common charges filed against the 300 prisoners that have been approved for release during the hostage swap. Other more serious crimes filed against these prisoners include threatening security, illegally entering Israel, and supporting terrorism. Several were also charged with attempted murder or attacks on Israeli forces. And in response to criticism about the administrative detention policy, Israel has stated that the policy is legal and a necessary security measure. Israel had previously released more than 200 prisoners. That number is expected to increase as long as these swaps continue.